Hello and welcome to Compliance Culture, the podcast where we explore what it really takes to embed compliance in practice, not just on paper. I'm Lucinda Carney, CEO of Actus, and each episode will be unpacking how organisations can move beyond tick box compliance to build a culture of genuine accountability, trust, and ethical behaviour. We'll be joined by experts and leaders who are making compliance meaningful, from consumer duty and SMCR to training, performance and leadership. So if you're looking to bridge the gap between rules and real-world behaviour, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to this week's Compliance Culture podcast. I'm so excited because I've got Keith Richards from the Consumer Duty Association, the CEO, and he's going to join me today to tell me a bit about the Consumer Duty Alliance, not association, and also where it came from and all about outcomes. We know that is one of the biggest challenges with consumer duty. It's what the FCA is after. So I'm really hoping you're going to be able to help shed a little bit of light into how people can really get into outcomes and start to demonstrate outcomes. Keith, for people who aren't familiar, would you mind just explaining a bit about the Consumer Duty Alliance and how it came about?
Yes, of course, Lucinda, and thank you very much for inviting me along. So the Consumer Duty Alliance was created prior to the FCA's launching of the duty just over 2 years ago now, and has become probably the second largest membership body for retail financial advice sector just in that 2 year period. Mainly because our purpose as a independent not-for-profit body, we also have no commercial conflicts of interest. So by doing that, we create discussions and topics or sharing of good practice, experience and insights to support individuals and firms deliver against consumer duty outcomes, but also by augmenting the value of the support services, established support services that can aid and support organisations in those deliveries. So that's kind of where we created it. It is formally a professional body with a consumer focus rather than an industry. So we not in any way wanted to create something that already existed like a trade body. This is genuinely an organisation that everyone can be part of, but allows also the importance of competition. So every sector needs competitive environments to work well. But equally, we're all kind of pointing in the same direction. So sometimes creating an alliance that doesn't take away from the importance of individual firms and what they represent and the role that they perform was very important for us. And I'm pleased to say that it's been more successful than we'd anticipated and has been pretty much non-stop for the last 2.5 years.
Yes, you said, is it 40,000 members or you're up to now? Is
Yeah,
something like that? Yes, that's quite
absolutely.
a growth curve.
Yes, it's yes, it's been a journey. It was all of the board of the Consumer Duty Alliance do so on a pro bono basis. It's that bit about giving back, but it's grown so much. We've had to employ someone this year, and we have a number of other volunteers that contribute to the content.
And I've certainly found it very, very engaging and supportive and collaborative, which I think the term alliance is really nice in terms of that. And I imagine you're liaising with the FCA. Some of what you're doing is helping to translate or communicate both ways with the FCA and just to help ultimately achieve a better experience for consumers. But how do you liaise with the FCA? How do you find you're talking to them or influencing them?
Yeah, so we've had a good and ongoing relationship with the FCA and various departments, but more recently, over the last 12 months, we've been working with or in collaboration with the supervisory teams on better engaging the market. So I think it's fair to say that regulators are now accepting that perhaps they use regulatory terminology where they might have previously been critical of firms using sector-centric language rather than consumer-centric. And I think we all accept from time to time that the documents we write don't come across in plain English and if you gave them to a member of your family, they'd probably struggle to understand. So we think they're clear because we know what we're talking about, but we don't always write it in a way that others do. And I think regulators are now recognizing that they may be guilty of that as well. And there's some good examples where they've started to change language They're working with the sector more. So a really good example since they've launched Consumer Duty, which they positioned as a seismic shift, and I would wholeheartedly agree with that. It's a shift from prescriptive rules to outcomes-based regulation. Now, what does that really mean? Well, when you shift from rules, you can end up being in breach of a rule, even though not one consumer has been financially disadvantaged. And yet it could cost the firm thousands, if not millions of pounds to remedy that breach of a process or a rule. In outcomes-based regulation, we've now got this shift to demonstrating compliance with the outcomes expected, even if that means adjusting the processes that you've already implemented. So as long as you can demonstrate that you've taken away 69 pages to improve client understanding, then that's a massive tick in delivering against outcomes-based regulation and one of the core elements of making sure consumers or customers understand what it is they've done. So we all know that one of the big criticisms of some documents and policy wording is that the consumer doesn't really understand at all. Actually, it leads to a level of mistrust, but actually it met the rules that might have been in place. So you were basically doing it to comply with the rules, not the outcome.
So hence you've got a kind of tick box culture as opposed to actually making a difference on what it is you're trying to impact, i.e. consumer experience or protecting vulnerable customers. So
Absolutely.
in terms of the outcome, I think this is one of the things that outcomes are, that's the panacea, isn't it? But they're actually quite hard to get your head round, and often you've got to put things in place to achieve outcomes, I guess. How would you sort of suggest good practices for people to try and get to demonstrating outcomes or to measure outcomes, because it's quite tricky?
Yeah, it is. I mean, the truth is, most good firms already comply with the principles of consumer duty. And, when you think of the three cross-cutting rules and the four areas of consumer duty outcomes, actually, if you translate them into business objectives, most good firms probably would realize that that's exactly what their business is based on. So, if anyone just looks at those four outcomes. Now, what have we seen different from the FCA on this occasion? Well, we've seen them using lots of examples of where they're seeing good practice, and this is even within the first 6 months of the implementation. And guess what? They don't talk about bad practice. They talk about where firms could do better, which is quite a positive shift.
Yeah.
So if we all accept we're not perfect, but where could I do better? Well, we've got a regulator that for the last 2 years has really been given lots of examples of where they've seen evidence of good practice and where firms could do better. Now, we, for example, engaged with the supervisory team who have been out on the road. So we've taken them to small firms in particular because the FCA recognised that they were perhaps not as well engaged with small firms as they should do. So if we go back to the language barrier, on the or the first anniversary of Consumer Duty, the legacy products and board reporting became a new requirement.
Right.
If you take the financial advice sector, 80% of regulated firms are deemed to be small, and most of those small firms don't have a board. So asking them to do an annual board report seems a bit bizarre.
Meaningless.
But what the regulator really meant was that they wanted to make sure that whatever strategic mechanism you use, so big firms will do an annual board review as part of their strategy, and then the board will sign it off. That's why it got framed as annual board report. They wanted to make sure that every firm was incorporating outcomes-based regulation within their strategy. So they wanted to make sure that whatever their strategy was, they wanted the board in particular or the leadership to recognize what aspect of outcomes based, what outcome that delivered for their customers aligned to the duty. Simple as that.
It's like a business plan, really, isn't it? So that whatever their business plan is, and also what this links into is that if you're doing good by your consumers, then it should also be good for business. I guess it's just tying it together.
It's exactly that, Lucinda. And so that's exactly the language we use to small firms. So if you've got your business plan, if you're not dusting it off once a year and making sure that you're aligned, you should be. So that's an example of good practice. And what the regulator really expects now is that you have done that and that you've got outcomes-based regulation incorporated. So the old prescriptive rules, which might have driven you around the bend because you were able to jump through hoops that seemed unnecessary, were a burden. Actually, you don't have to do that now. So you are now empowered to make changes that better deliver against the outcomes for your customers than actually simply following a set of prescriptive tick box rules.
It's interesting actually though, so it makes total sense logically, and I suppose it's very adult in terms of in the empowerment of the industry. But it's actually by that very nature of doing this, it makes things less clear. So if you haven't got rules that you can get wrong, it's less easy to have what good looks like clearly defined in
Oh,
terms of the
well,
outcomes.
here's a really, really good point. Look, when I was a director on a number of big commercial entities, I was head of retail for Royal London Group, and then I was MD of probably one of the sector's second largest distribution groups, which included compliance services. And there were occasions where there was mass issue with the processes that were going in as part of a regulatory reform. Until as a director, you challenged and asked where the regulator was telling us to do those processes. And what you realized very quickly, it was one person's interpretation or a department's interpretation of what we had to do as a firm, not an instruction from the FCA or FSA before them. So part of what we've landed with is that we've created some bureaucracy in the belief that that's because that was our interpretation or our compliance department's interpretation of what we needed to do as a firm, which is why you get variations across the market. There isn't a standardized one size fits all. Some firms unquestionably have over-engineered the requirements, and the regulator themselves have recognized exactly that. So in other words, it's not them that told us. So in financial advice world, we're tackling at the moment the fact that if you go back to regulate the start of regulation, all firms were expected to issue something called a reasons why letter. It's basically a one page that just simply set out the bullet points of what the product or the solution was providing in simple bullet point form. This is what you've taken out, this is what it achieves or is designed to achieve, and this is how much it costs. And if that isn't aligned to what you believe you've done, then you've got 14 days to sign this and send it back. That reasons why letter grew to, in some instances, a 60 or 70 page suitability report. And I think everyone in the market realizes that that hasn't improved customer understanding, it doesn't improve client confidence. And in some ways, actually, it's eroded some trust because consumers think that you're hiding something in there and they're just not skilled enough to pull it out. Now, the regulator would agree with that as well. And just recently taking them around the country to meet with small firms, they have acknowledged that those kind of suitability reports are just do not meet the requirements of the duty if one of the core aspects is to help consumers better understand what they've done. So you're delivering it in a way that the customer understands. Now, the problem is we created those 60 and 70 page forms, not the regulator. But we did it in good faith on the basis of the regulator was expecting us to put far more detail in to replay it back to the consumer. So we've now got a really interesting point where we're working with FCA and we're also engaging Financial Ombudsman Service as well, because there's a few myths around you've got to create these huge files just in case a complaint is ever created against you. So we've got to blow some of the myths now, and we've got to take these 60-page documents down to a level that actually does deliver against this objective of improving client understanding, because that's what its objective should be. So if you accept that 70 pages, no one's reading it, why keep doing it?
Yeah.
So these are some of the positive opportunities that we've got. It's not the regulator that dictated the size of a suitability report. It was our interpretation, and that's what we've done. So
So
now
it sort of became over-engineered.
lots of aspects of regulation have been over-engineered because in fairness, it's actually the opposite. When you're in prescriptive rules, you've still got to interpret how they apply within your organization and what processes or systems and controls you need to adapt or change to meet them. And every firm has taken slightly different variations of approach. So depending on the market, the segment that you're operating in, the demographic of the customers you're dealing with, etc. So actually, we haven't got a one size fits all already. Some firms definitely have over-engineered. Now, here's the interesting thing, Lucinda. If anyone wants to go into the FCA's website and look at the first set of updates, I think it was in June of 23. There is some guidance on updates. Now, one of the first things they cover is examples of good practice and where firms could do better on governance and culture. Now, they give an example where they've seen evidence of firms where the board have discussed and understood the core elements of outcomes-based regulation, what that means for their customers and their business, and that it would seem that consumer duty runs throughout the whole organization. Because obviously, once you take it from a board director's responsibility, guess what? They share that throughout their line of responsibility. Then they give an example where firms could do better, and they immediately go to where they've seen the board doesn't discuss consumer outcomes in line with the duty. Instead, they've delegated it to the responsibility of a compliance or risk committee. So that's the old world. So even the regulator signposting is we shouldn't be delegating to a single department to decide how to improve the outcomes of the duty. We're all now responsible for the duty. It's no longer the responsibility of compliance. Everyone from product design right the way to front end delivery should be embracing those principles of are we delivering against the four key elements of outcomes? So, are we supporting our customers in a way that they need throughout that journey? Do we offer our services or our products at a fair price and fair value? Are we clear and transparent about what they do? And do we check that they understand? So, there's simple things that if you're running a business, you'd want all these things to be at the heart of your business because reputationally, it means you'll end up with more business. You'll end up with happier customers, stronger brand reputation, and far more success. So the great gift that we've been given is an opportunity to move away from prescriptive rules, which someone else has interpreted and then implemented, to actually something called powered to deliver against core outcomes. So instead of doing a 62 page, maybe a one page will deliver against consumer duty. It wouldn't against prescriptive rules in the past. And that was the problem. Prescriptive rules kind of lent us to create tick boxes and processes and so on.
But that's also it's almost, and it's the habitual. It's like the insurance almost as well. Because if you delegate it to a compliance team who dots the i's and crosses the t's and has list, then that feels like it's protecting you from the regulator because you've got lots of evidence. But the point is probably you're missing the point, and all that work that's going into capturing stuff would be better looking at actually are you doing things properly. It is quite hard to evidence. I suppose that's the thing then in terms of I get completely the whole thing about doing it culturally, and if the leadership are talking about it and people know what, right down to the person answering the phones, they know why they're doing it. This is seen to be something strategically important, then you are probably going to get better results. I suppose culture, this whole cultural piece, is quite hard to evidence to the regulator, isn't it? And I don't know, it's a bit, I'm not quite sure what the answer is there because if the firms that are doing it well, are doing it well, and that's great, they've probably got the positive culture and those things, but can they demonstrate it? And then on the other hand, how do you recognise if a firm isn't doing it well, if they are paying lip service to it? I don't know if you
Yeah.
have comments on that.
Do you know what? When I took over a professional body as CEO, one of the most important aspects of being a professional body was holding your or promoting ethical standards, having a code of ethics that everyone could get behind. The language that sometimes was used was as if people weren't ethical. And I found that totally bizarre. So
Yeah.
going out promoting about we've got to be more ethical suggests that we're not ethical to start with. You're either honest or you're not honest. You can't be a bit more honest. So you can't be more ethical. You're either ethical or you're not. So for me, the language kind of, I think, distracts from what the regulator's trying to say is they're not suggesting that the vast majority of people across retail services are not
Yeah.
ethical people or they've not got the right culture. It's just, are there things that you're doing that might actually be misaligned to your own cultural beliefs or standards? So an example of that already under the duty, there's been countless amount of firms that have recognized that by lifting the drain, having a look at some of their policy wording, having a look at the way they support consumers, they've made changes and they're very proud of the impact, the positive impact that it's had for their customers. So that didn't make them a terrible firm previously. It just meant that they found ways to
Could
improve
be better. Yeah.
outcomes, or they've gone out and they've spoken to customers and realized that the things that they thought were important weren't anywhere near as important to the end consumer as they thought they were. So they're not doing them anymore. So I think for most businesses, you would see yourself as progressively looking annually at, are we on course? Are there things that we could do better? Has the climate change demand for the kind of services that we provide? Are we up to speed? So we all recognize that, nothing stands still. We can't be perfect. So I think the use of words like culture is misused because you're inferring that people aren't in the right cultural space. What we're really saying is, are you testing yourself against your own cultural expectation and standards? So I've had people talk to me about price and fair value, frustrated sometimes that they think it's the regulator forcing the price down, or being a price regulator. Now, the FCA will absolutely respond by saying they are absolutely not a price regulator. In fact, recently they've just come out saying actually fair value isn't about the lowest price. So all we're expecting you to do, in very simple terms, in my language, and in fact, the head of supervision at the FCA, Nick Hume, has also adopted the principle of just saying, look, this is the family test. Do you look at the services that you provide at whatever cost it is? And would you be happy if someone else was providing that to someone you loved?
Yeah.
The family test. And it's as simple as that, because I think where some organizations have done things, we've always done it this way. Doesn't mean to say it's right. It doesn't mean to say it's wrong. But I think, are you confident that it still applies today as relevant as when you first implemented it 3 years ago? So I think culturally, we've got to move away from that. It's about, every firm absolutely is focused on the right cultural set of cultural behaviors. But we all need to test ourselves from time to time to see if there's any areas to potentially improve. And where we
It's
find
kind
them.
of continuous improvement or learning culture, isn't it? And making it safe. And that's what the benefit what you get when it's not kind of rules and when it's not wrong or right. You're actually
Yeah.
going, how can we be even better? So that's good, and having that kind of ongoing upward spiral as
Yeah.
opposed to just sort of ticking things off.
Absolutely. And everyone does, I mean, in my commercial career, we used to have annual reviews of our business plan, our strategy. And guess what? We always found scope to improve, often based on a year's worth of experience. So some of the decisions we made at the start of the year, I mean, look, I've never made a bad decision. It's only when they went wrong they become bad decisions.
Yeah.
So none of us consciously set out to do the wrong thing or deliver suboptimal value. Of course we don't. But when we've got a year's worth of experience, we can sometimes assess that it's not working as well as we'd hoped, or it's not delivering as much value to our customers as we thought it did. So we adjust, we adapt. And that's what the regulator wants to see. They want to see a behavior that says, just because we put it in place 2 years ago and everyone thought it was good, do we test that it's still good and it's delivering against those objectives? So this is where it's a great opportunity. Listen, so where I'm really passionate about this is actually this is the first terminology, consumer duty, that the FCA doesn't own. This is not a set of prescriptive rules. So
Right.
I came into financial services before regulation was introduced. So just to show my age. And I worked for an organization that passionately believed it put its customers at the forefront of everything, that it was customer centric, that, I mean, frankly, I think in those days, the chairman saw any complaints that came through the door, which again drove the right set of behaviors
Yeah.
across the whole of the management, because
Yeah.
you definitely didn't want it to be seen as a failure in your area. I think as the world's gone on, I don't think chairmen could possibly cope with the amount of complaints that possibly come through the door. But we own outcomes based business. It's all about good business. That's where you want to be as a business. You want to be recognized for doing the right thing, for being the best at what you do. And this is where this, for the first time, this is not regulatory terminology. This is industry centric terminology. Consumer duty for me are the standards of all good firms. Every good firm I've ever been associated with, or I know, or work for, passionately believe they were one of the good actors. Of course, we all believe that the problem was somewhere else down the road. So we were having to jump through hoops now just because of some poor actor who wasn't doing it right. This, for the first time, is a shift away. So, whether we look at previous reforms of regulation, they're all regulatory terms that come and go. Consumer duty can never go. Look at the outcomes. You're never going to drop those outcomes because, candidly, they were the outcomes that most good firms believed that they were delivering to before regulation even came into effect.
So you truly see it's quite different from any of the regulations that's come before, a kind of a breath of fresh air in terms of continuous improvement and something that is in the interest of the industry as well as the consumer.
Massively. I think, look, we've had 37 years prescriptive regulation, different boards that I've been on as a business leader with core objectives to drive the business. When it came to regulation, I had no voice. I had a voice at the board. Of course, I could debate things and I could, like other directors, just feel frustrated that another set of process changes was just going to lead to frustration amongst the staff. Not all of it, by the way. Of course, some regulatory reform I could understand was necessary and was something we needed to do. But in the whole, now, as a business leader, I could challenge it. But the moment the compliance director said, well, that's what the regulator expects, that was it. We just signed it off. Even though we were signing off things that we felt was adding no value to our customers and adding no value to the business. But we signed them off because we were being told by our internal interpretation that that's what we've got to do. So we did it.
Yeah. Would you
Today,
say that there's people, because this is a different style of leadership, and maybe there might be a whole host of compliance experts out there listening who've been brought up with that kind of regulation, that this is exactly what you've got to do. And this is thinking differently. This is more kind of taking the shackles off and looking outwards and what should we do and defining it. Do you see that there's almost a challenge for people to work differently, think differently, training? How do people make
oh,
that adjustment?
massive, Lucinda. I think, look, this is a seismic shift. The FCA used that term right from the outset. And seismic shifts don't just get implemented in 5 minutes. It
Mm.
takes a time. And when you look at the size of the regulated market, it's moving at different paces. Some are a bit glacial because they're just, it's not that they resist change, but they think everything's fine now. So why change it? Others can see the opportunity, and we're seeing that massive shift go on. Now, compliance professionals have a key role to play in this. So it's not about in any way trying to suggest that our compliance teams got it all wrong. Far from it. They were doing what we were employing them to do, and candidly, we put too much responsibility on their shoulders.
Mm.
Now, they have often different skill sets to someone you'd recruit for marketing or sales or HR or so we know that people have different skill sets that lend themselves to different disciplines or different jobs. Some people are lucky, they can interchange, but generally, people have that particular area of focus that really sparks them. But by definition, if you wanted to simplify your communications to your customers, you wouldn't give that to people who typically fell into the category of being a great compliance expert
Yes,
or a
it is a different skill set, isn't it? And I can clearly say, coming from a sort of HR background, I can see that if you're going to truly take the consumer duty to everyone owning it, it being part of it, then it can't be down to the compliance professional who's in a little bubble. It needs to be everybody needs to take part in it. Everyone needs to be aware of it. So that would require more sort of integration and more collaboration, a different style of role, I guess, for that
yeah,
compliance professional, which can be
yeah.
challenging in its own way because you can't control by ticking all the boxes that we're adhering to it because it's something more organic if you're doing it properly.
Absolutely. And I think if you test against, so what the regulator keeps repeatedly saying, there's some really encouraging. So first of all, we've not seen any massive enforcement action. So it's not that there isn't some going on quietly behind the scenes, but that's a totally different change from the past. So one of the mechanisms to drive behaviours sometimes is that you censure a firm that's not getting it right, doesn't seem to be responding quick enough, and then you're hoping that that's going to drive behaviours in all the good
Sort
firms.
of scare, yeah,
Yeah. Now, the truth is, it doesn't, because we all respond better to the sharing of good practice. So when you hold up a good firm, we're all interested in why they're a good firm and what they're doing differently. And then it allows us to benchmark. Now, regulators have that been completely counter to regulators in the past because they were probably worried that the moment they hold up a good firm or a firm as being good, they'll do something wrong next week and
yeah,
then they look stupid. Um, but I think we've now got a regulator that's been brave enough to hold firms up, not necessarily name them, but give examples of good practice. So they found a way around that, naming someone and then being embarrassed if they get it
yes.
wrong. They're giving really good
Sort of
examples.
using generic, they're using anonymized case studies type thing. Is that the,
Abs Absolutely. And we're seeing that's having a really positive effect. Now, they're also finding their own way at being braver at giving the market more confidence to do the right thing because we have had 37 years of doing it a certain way,
yeah, yeah,
and it's going to take a while to unwind that. So when you say that this has got to be embedded throughout an organization, what does that really mean? So we've got to start socializing more examples of good practice. We've got to socialize more examples of case studies where a firm has, taken away disproportionate processes that everyone knew was adding no value. And they've been brave enough to take them away, put in something much similar, which is now achieving the objective, let's say, of improving client understanding. And we can evidence that
yeah.
because we've
And it will
spoken.
grow over time as well. It doesn't happen overnight. You make a change, the outcome is going to take a little while to actually kick through as well, isn't it?
It absolutely. I mean, you're hearing things like just recently, well, last week, the CEO of the FCA wrote to the Chancellor with a further commitment to working across the sector to eliminate disproportionate regulation, taking a far more proportionate approach, wanting to give the sector more confidence to move forward to make changes. Now, he was specifically focusing on the wholesale market, but it reads across into to all sectors. So I think what the regulator's seeing as well is, yes, there is a bit of a government remit on a growth agenda, which regulators need to be part of. But we've also got a public who are being disserved because regulation has stifled innovation, it's stifled access, it's increased cost. And therefore, actually, I think we've come to a tipping point where outcomes based isn't about reducing standards, it's actually about improving standards. Because if I'm being unhelpful to you because I've got to follow a protracted process that you get massively frustrated with as a customer, stop doing it.
Yeah,
But if you think, well, I've got to do it because compliance, we've got to,
I've
no,
got to
you
say this.
haven't, because you're failing now against a core aspect of the duty. So what I think we're going to find eventually is where people are seeing that simplification is something that actually can lead to a better outcome if you just take one of those four aspects of the duty. So it's great news for businesses. It's just
It's
it takes a
interesting.
while to filter through.
Yeah, it's interesting the regulation thing because I think sometimes people say, oh, that means they're going to chuck the regulations out, but it's actually more that they're empowering firms to do the right thing as opposed to be tied up in regulations. It feels when you the way you explained it. It's just this really interesting conversation. Thank you so much for this, Keith. Just in summary, just let's go back to the Consumer Duty Alliance. Are there any things coming up? What does year three look like for you as an organisation, and what should listeners be aware of to look out for?
Well, we're continuing to grow across the membership. We're working, so we're touring the country at the moment we've gone on what we call the Four Nations tour. So we've been working with the regulators to run conferences in England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. So we've got another one coming up in Marlow, which is west of London for anyone who doesn't know where Marlow is. And then we're finishing off in Wales. We're already now planning for 2026 another series of going to the regions to engage practitioners directly. And I've got to say, small firms have already had a positive impact on policy. So it just goes to show when regulators are asking for input, they mean it because already from our October event, we had about 600 practitioner and principals of small firms. We had the Chatham House rule session. One of the biggest gripes was the amount of data requests that the FCA were putting out to the market and the massive impact it was having. And so guess what? The regulator has already changed the requirement for data. They've reduced the burden, and there's more to come. So we're going to carry on working with our policymakers to try to be that bridge.
You're facilitating, really, aren't you? There, facilitating the collective voice that can.
Absolutely. And lots of other organisations that are part of the Alliance are coming along to those. So we now call them partners in raising standards together, because this really isn't about reducing standards. This is about actually how we get rid of duplication, bureaucracy that allows us to spend more time on delivering outcomes, which, by the way, is good news for business, because we might see there's no threat to compliance people per se, but we might see a number of them actually merged into other departments that focus on more business outcomes rather than trying to work out what the regulator wants us to do.
Yeah.
So we're going to be doing that. We've got a number of good practice guides coming. We've just recently launched something called the Women's Wealth Alliance, which is, and each of our sub-sectors are chaired by other people. So I've got Vanessa Barnes, who's a very well-known chartered financial planner and runs her own all-female advice firm. But the Women's Wealth Alliance isn't just about women in the profession. It's actually about how we help men who actually deal with women. So I don't know if you know, but 60% of the wealth in the UK will be in the hands of women by the end of this year.
Really? Didn't know that.
Yeah. Over 20% of financial advisors, financial planners are male. So we as much need to help their men understand how do they deal and interact with the changing dynamics of a customer or a client base that might want to be dealt with differently. We've got something called the Financial Vulnerability Task Force, which is chaired by another well-known chartered financial planner. Margaret Snowden OBE chairs our Retirement Income Task Force. We've got technology. So what we're trying to do, really, Lucinda, is carry on building that conduit that allows everyone to participate without stealing the thunder of any organisation or anyone who's leading the way in any of those aspects. In fact, quite the opposite. We're already signposting to a lot of good organisations that have been established for a long time, that are doing some great work in any of those core areas. So the CDA isn't really the organisation. The CDA is the alliance that allows everyone that's part of that alliance to shine. And that's what we're really trying to do more of. So you'll see more of that coming out, certainly in 2026. There'll be more to come this year. But it's certainly, I don't think, foot off the pedal for a long time yet.
That's great. It sounds very, very collaborative. And speaking as someone who's not sort of from the financial services, it feels really altruistic, which isn't necessarily something that is always associated with financial services. So I think that's a real positive. And I'm not saying they're not, but it just kind of comes over brilliantly. Keith, thank you so much for joining me on the Compliance Culture podcast.
You're very welcome. It's great to be with you. Thank you, Lucinda.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining me today on Compliance Culture. I hope you found our discussion was practical and insightful and helps us to see how we can all play a part in embedding genuine values-led compliance. If you'd like to know more about how Actus software can support organisations with performance accountability, consumer duty and SMCR compliance, why don't you visit us on actus.co.uk? The links are in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and share the podcast, and join me next time as we continue to explore what real compliance culture looks like in action.
Tracking consumer duty metrics manually can be time-consuming and inconsistent. Spreadsheets quickly become outdated, and it's hard to evidence progress when data lives in multiple places. Actus Oversight takes this pain away, bringing all your consumer duty metrics, actions, and ownership into one intuitive platform. With real-time dashboards and audit-ready reporting, you'll save time, stay in control, and have complete confidence in your compliance story.
Why don't you visit us on actus.co.uk?